my name is Annie, and for this video, I'm going to be talking about something that I learned while working on a graphic novel that I think would benefit you as well. If you're listening to this, you probably know me from my podcast, World of Webcomics. If not, it's probably up your alley. It's all about me interviewing fellow comic creators, so definitely be sure to check that out. Something that I'm really enjoying about doing the podcast, and hopefully what you're also getting out of it, is that in listening to fellow creators, it makes me think about my own work and how I can improve it. In the episode in which I interview Barbusco Studios, something in particular really stuck out to me. Yeah, I find that working in batches helps a lot. Do you work chronologically when you're working in batches, or do you kind of skip around to like the parts that you want to draw?
No, I work chronologically. I don't think it's good to work in that way because because I know that there's this kind of impulse on jumping to other scenes, but I think that's kind of bad because that means that you are not liking what
is happening.
Yeah,
like
you are
it's
like
not interesting,
like
you know.
I noticed that when I was trying to write some books, and I was like listening to some writers tips, on what to write, and I noticed that it's somewhat a bad behavior. Writers, they like to jump around. Oh no, this part is cool and I want to do, and I noticed that happens because actually you don't like what's happening right now. You are not excited by what's happening right now. So
if you don't like it, imagine your reader.
If you don't like it, imagine the reader. So I think you should rethink it. Always when that happens, I try to rethink it.
That's a good point. Yeah, it just makes me reflect. I need to edit. I need to edit now. So you hear me joke in that clip about needing to self-reflect and edit because I really did. And in fact, I have. My comic Soul Match, which you can read on Webtoon, is essentially a love story. It's framed through the genre of sci-fi, and it does have some horror elements as well. But again, at the heart, it is a love story. Chapter 2 features the two main love interests finally meeting each other. What I realized is that in the original script, there wasn't really enough room for the couple to develop chemistry and get to know each other. And part of that was because at the beginning of the chapter, there was a lot of expository dialogue and flashbacks, both to establish the technology that ends up helping the characters meet each other, as well as establish some of the insecurities that the main character, Nora, has from her past relationships. But what I realized is that there is a much more efficient way to convey this information, and that I kind of had already established a lot of this information in the first chapter as well. I had to be honest with myself, and I hope that you are honest with yourself in realizing that whenever you tell yourself this part is necessary because it establishes world building or backstory or character motivation or atmosphere or themes, what you are really saying is that this part is kind of boring and unnecessary, but reworking it would be too annoying, so I'm just going to continue as it is right now. That might sound harsh, but it's probably true. And again, I speak from a place of needing to be honest with myself. One of my top 10 favorite movies of all time is Cop Car, starring Kevin Bacon. And the reason that is one of my favorites is because it is masterful in how it tells its story in a very minimalistic way. I've made several videos on my love of the show Black Mirror as well, and I think something that show does really well is establish multiple things at once, especially through dialogue. If your story needs to come to a halt and you are not excited about drawing a certain part because it needs to quote-unquote establish something, you're doing something wrong. When I initially started working on Chapter 2 of Soul Match, I assumed I was skipping around because I wanted to draw all the fun, cutesy, romantic parts. But again, this story is a love story, so it's not like those scenes are just for fun. They're important to the character development and the essential themes. Stop trying to justify the existence of a non-essential scene and stop and think about how you could convey any of the actually necessary information in a more efficient way. So just to give you a little insight into my process, I'm a comic creator who really strongly believes in scripts. So if any of what I've said so far has made you feel defensive, that might also make you feel defensive, but that's just how I work, and I honestly think that it's really beneficial to do so. I initially wrote a really detailed outline, and then I actually hand wrote all of the dialogue. And when I am going to actually draw chapters, I begin to type the dialogue. So from going from handwritten to typed into a Word doc so that I can copy and paste into the word bubbles, I usually end up seeing how much dialogue there actually is, and I will edit down. I didn't always work in batches, but I highly recommend this as well for a number of reasons. From a practical standpoint, I think it really helps keep the artwork consistent. I think it helps you be faster because you don't just zone in on one page, and piggybacking off of that, you really see the whole picture. And that also helps with story as well. So again, in looking at just chapter 2 of my story, what I initially started with was taking the script and thinking about how to translate that into pages. So I would start with the layouts and adding the text. If you don't do text first, you're going to run out of room. So that's what I recommend, just to see how much space the actual text is going to take up. And sometimes I will edit the text down even more after that, actually seeing it on the page. Which, side note, because of that, I think that comics present a challenge, but also a strength in storytelling in that they actually encourage efficiency, which is kind of what I'm talking about in this video. And usually at this stage, when I'm actually visualizing how things are going to look, is when I realize that there might be some need for changes in pacing. Like, for example, in the romantic parts, about 15 pages ended up getting added because I realized that I wanted certain moments to have more room to breathe. In fact, there are a lot of parts that have no dialogue and take up large areas of the page to sort of convey more emotion and also be more impactful because they literally take up more like real estate on the page and within the book. And so in adding 15 pages, and then after my conversation with Barbusco Studios, I realized that I could cut about 15 pages from the beginning as well. So that kind of worked out pretty perfectly. So even though I didn't know it until I had that conversation, what I realize now and what I recommend that you do is when you're looking at all your layouts, trust your gut and think about the parts that you are actually excited to draw. And if there are any pages that you're not really interested in, then your reader is probably definitely not going to be interested in them either. There's a reason why you feel that way, and there's probably a better way that you can get across whatever you're trying to get across with those pages in a shorter amount of time. A good philosophy to have when writing is get in and get out as quickly as you can. And again, this is not to say that every moment has to feel fast, like it's that scene from The Room.
How much is it?
It'll be $18.
Here you go. Keep the change. Hi, doggy.
You're my favorite customer.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Just think about what is actually necessary. It doesn't mean that you can't have long, quiet moments that focus more on emotion. It just means that there's probably a lot of fat in your story that you can cut out. And that also kind of leads to the idea of like kill your darlings as well. If there's a scene that you're attached to, but like, for example, I had another flashback in here, but I had a flashback in the first chapter that alluded to a lot of the same information. So it just didn't need to be there. And I hate exposition scenes where we explain how things work. And yet I had one of those scenes and I had convinced myself that it was necessary. But when you have something like magical or futuristic, like if you're working in the fantasy or sci-fi genre, I actually think it detracts if you try to explain it. So I'm going to replace that with just like a short montage of the technology being used. If you try to establish how something that isn't real works, I think it always comes off as clunky and more often than not presents more holes than it does answers. If you start to kind of pseudo explain something, people are just going to want to question how it works more. So less is more in this sense. And I think a lot of times why those kind of exposition scenes happen is that we are actually, as authors, explaining it to ourselves. I think it's fine to want to know how your technology or your magic works, but like your reader doesn't necessarily have to. I think it's good to have a general understanding of your own world building so that you can get that across in dialogue, in visuals, but you don't need to have a scene where everything stops and you just have to like sit down and sit on a class on how everything works in this story. Nobody likes those scenes. So why did I have one? Exactly. Why do you have one? You probably do. Edit out that scene. Nobody cares. So again, if you're excited about drawing it, your readers are probably going to be excited about reading it. If you think it's boring or unnecessary or essential for some dumb reason that you've convinced yourself it's essential, it's probably not. So cut it out. Think of a better way to say those things faster. And again, work in batches. Again, I did a detailed outline. I did a handwritten script, a typed script, edited the dialogue more with word bubbles and layouts than I do blocking and roughs, sketch, inks. I set it off to a flatter and then I finish the colors and reformat things for Webtoon. So there you go. Also, this is editing me, just inserting the fact that since initially recording the audio for this video, I have also completely rewritten the second act of my story and am formatting it so that beta readers can actually read it and give me feedback. Comic book writing is weird because I feel like sometimes you don't realize things until you draw them. And so having 2 chapters pretty much done and then rewriting your second act is a bit like trying to fly a plane while you're building the plane. But you know, it's a symbiotic thing between word and image, and I still believe in editing and putting in the work. I hope this gave you something to think about, just because hearing that advice in that interview gave me so much clarity, and so I would love to pass that on and just share how I internalized it and put it into my own work so that hopefully you can think about it with your stuff as well. I think we need to care a lot more about story in comics, especially webcomics. I think we can get ahead of ourselves and be really excited about sharing the story with the world because of the ease with which we can do that with webcomics. And while it's dangerous to never really start your project, I do think that we underestimate the importance of prep work. Take the time to actually write your story. Look at your chapters as a whole and analyze where you can actually edit down. Because this is something that I had to address in my own work, I just felt really inspired to talk about it. But if you guys want more videos about storytelling and perhaps like advice about making a comic, let me know. And if there's any topics in particular that you are wanting to hear, comment below. Yeah, hi, editing me again. Just wanted to say that perhaps one of those topics could deal with actively seeking out beta readers and what it's like to entirely scrap a whole act of your story, basically. I don't know, just a thought. Thank you again to Barbusco Studios for making what should have been apparent very clear. And I will see you guys next Monday. Bye.
I think I know that why we comic creators don't write it. It's because it's hard.
Yeah,
I think it's
very
because it's hard
to think what another person would say in that situation.
We
It's
actually
kind of-
because we are artists, like, and we want to get to the art and finish it as soon as possible and look at it finished. So we he said something like this,